The grit of the sun-baked asphalt seemed to radiate through the thin soles of his worn shoes, a low, persistent heat that mirrored the cold ember of betrayal settling in his chest. Arthur stood alone, a solitary, gray-haired figure against the vast, indifferent expanse of the desert highway rest stop. The only sounds were the buzz of a dying fluorescent light in the grimy restroom building and the sigh of the hot wind as it kicked up little cyclones of dust and discarded wrappers. The silence left in the wake of the departing car was louder than the argument that had preceded it. It was a cavernous, echoing silence, filled with the ghosts of words spoken and, more importantly, unspoken. "We just need a break, Dad," Leo had said, his voice a taut wire of frustration. Chloe, his wife, hadn't even looked at him, her gaze fixed on the horizon, as if he were already a memory she was trying to outrun. "It's just too much. We'll figure something out later. Someone will be along." The words were a flimsy bandage on a mortal wound, an attempt to disguise abandonment as a temporary inconvenience. Arthur watched the silver sedan shrink until it was just a glint of cruel sunlight, then nothing at all. He didn't tremble. He didn't cry. A lifetime of discipline, of mastering emotion and channeling it into silent, unyielding resolve, held him steady. To any casual observer, he was just an old man, forgotten and frail, a sad but unremarkable piece of roadside flotsam. But they wouldn't see the truth. They couldn't see the steel forged in crucibles they couldn't imagine, hidden beneath the soft facade of age. This moment of disrespect, so casual and yet so profound, was not an ending. It was a catalyst. The world believed him to be a relic, a dependent. But what his own son, didn't know was that this quiet, unassuming old man had once built empires with the same hands that now hung limply at his sides. And with a single thought, a single decision, he could unmake them. Welcome to a story that reminds us that still waters run deeper and colder than any raging river, a place where we explore the unwritten chapters in the lives of ordinary people who are anything but. We invite you to journey with us, to witness an act of profound injustice and the quiet, earth-shattering reckoning that follows. For Arthur, the world had just turned its back on him, but in doing so, it had unknowingly set him free. The foundation of his life, a structure he had painstakingly built on the flawed premise of family and filial love, had just been leveled. And on that cleared ground, he was about to build something new, something born not of love, but of a terrible, quiet clarity. The sun beat down, but inside Arthur, a long dormant winter had arrived. He had given his son everything, or so he thought. Now, he would truly give him what he deserved, nothing. The feeling was not one of rage, but of a deep, sorrowful peace. The peace of a final decision made. Arthur's life, for the past decade, had been an exercise in deliberate shrinkage. After a lifetime spent in the expansive, echoing halls of power, he had chosen a small, two-bedroom apartment in a quiet, leafy suburb. It was the kind of place people moved to when they were downsizing, when their lives had contracted to a manageable, comfortable perimeter. His neighbors knew him as Mr. Vance, the polite widower who kept to himself, whose greatest weekly adventure was a slow walk to the library or a visit to the local park to watch the chess players. His son Leo and daughter-in-law Chloe saw this orchestrated humility not as a choice, but as the inevitable, pitiable decline of a man whose world had grown small with age. They lived in a sprawling modern house in a gated community 20 minutes away, a house whose sleek lines and designer furniture screamed of success and ambition. They were blind to the quiet irony that the down payment for that very house, a generous gift from Dad, had been a rounding error in the accounts of a global corporation Arthur had founded in a dusty garage 40 years prior. They mistook his silence for vacancy, his frugality for necessity. They would visit on Sundays, bringing with them a whirlwind of brisk, performative concern. Chloe would rearrange the throw pillows on his simple sofa with a sigh, her eyes sweeping over his worn armchair and faded rugs with a look of thinly veiled pity. "Dad, you should really let us get you a new television," she'd say, her voice laced with the patronizing sweetness one uses for a child. "This thing is ancient." Arthur would just nod. "It works fine." Leo, a mid-level manager in a marketing firm, a position Arthur could have secured for him on the board of a dozen companies with a single phone call, would talk loudly about his stressful week, his brilliant insights in meetings, his plans for climbing the corporate ladder. He spoke to his father as if he were a high school student, explaining the complexities of the modern world with an air of weary patience. "You see, Dad, the market is all about synergy now. It's about disrupting paradigms." Arthur, the man who had personally disrupted the entire telecommunications paradigm in the late 90s, would simply listen, his expression placid. He never spoke of his past. He never corrected their condescending assumptions. He had retired, truly retired, not just from his position as chairman of Apex Dynamics, but from the identity of the titan he had been. He had wanted to be just a father, a grandfather. He had believed that the only wealth that mattered in the end was the love of his family. He had been wrong. This trip was their idea, a grand gesture of their filial duty. A road trip up the coast. It'll be great for you, Dad. Get you out of that stuffy apartment, Leo had announced. Arthur had seen it for what it was, a box to be checked, a performance for their friends who would hear all about how they took poor old Dad on a vacation. The tension had started from the moment he'd squeezed into the back seat of their luxury SUV, his simple canvas duffel bag looking out of place next to their matching designer luggage. The first day was a blur of forced smiles and thinly veiled impatience. Every stop he requested for the restroom was met with a shared, exasperated glance between Leo and Chloe. His stories, the few he offered about seeing this coastline as a young man, were cut short with a polite, "That's nice, Dad," before the conversation was wrenched back to their world of property values and office politics. He was a passenger not just in their car, but in their lives, a piece of luggage they were obligated to transport. The quiet callous skin on his hands, a permanent memento from his early years spent wiring circuit boards and hauling equipment, went unnoticed. The watch on his wrist, a simple-looking Patek Philippe with a plain leather strap, a gift from a Saudi prince after a monumental deal, was dismissed as a cheap fossil. They saw what they wanted to see, an old man, a burden, a ghost at their feast of life. And Arthur, in his profound, heartbreaking desire to simply be Dad, had let them. He had allowed them to build this narrative, brick by condescending brick, until he was fully immured within it. The argument, when it finally came, was not a roaring fire but a slow, suffocating smoke. It had been building for 2 days, a toxic pressure behind the forced smiles and clipped sentences. It happened at the Coyote Pass rest stop, a desolate patch of cracked pavement and sun-bleached picnic tables, situated in the middle of a vast, unforgiving stretch of high desert. The name itself felt like a bitter joke. They had been driving for hours, the air in the SUV thick with unspoken resentment. Arthur had asked to stop, his voice quiet. Chloe had let out a sigh that was a masterpiece of theatrical martyrdom. Again? We were just at that gas station an hour ago. Leo, gripping the steering wheel, his knuckles white, had pulled over with a squeal of tires that spoke of finality. He cut the engine. The sudden silence was absolute. "I can't do this," Leo said, not to Arthur but to the windshield. "I can't." Chloe reached over and placed a hand on his arm. "I know, honey. It's okay." It was a chillingly intimate gesture, a confirmation of a conspiracy that had Arthur as its sole target. They were a team, and he was the opposition. "What's wrong?" Arthur asked, his voice even, though he felt the ground beneath him beginning to shift. Leo finally turned, his face a mask of aggrieved self-pity. "What's wrong, Dad?" This whole thing. We thought this trip would be good for you, a way for us to connect. But it's just a chore. You're slow. You need things constantly. We can't go to the restaurants we want to go to. We can't do the things we want to do. It's like we're babysitting." Each word was a carefully aimed stone. Chloe chimed in, her voice dripping with false empathy. "Your father doesn't understand, Leo. His world is different now. We have to be patient." The word patient was delivered like an insult. "Patient?" Leo scoffed, a humorless, ugly sound. "I've been patient for years. Patient while you just sit in that apartment, not doing anything, not even trying. We're trying to build a life, a future, and we're constantly having to worry about you." The accusation hung in the air, thick and poisonous. Worry about him. Arthur, the man whose strategic foresight had been the subject of business school case studies, whose personal wealth could have bought this entire county and turned it into a nature preserve without him even noticing the expense. He felt a strange detachment, as if he were watching a poorly written play. This character, this Leo, was a stranger to him. The boy he had raised, the child he had loved with a fierce and protective silence, was gone, replaced by this bitter, entitled man. "We need a break," Leo said, his voice hardening into a decision. "Just for a day or two. To have our own vacation." Arthur looked out the window at the desolate landscape. The sun was relentless. There was a small, grimy building with a faded diner sign and a single gas pump. Nothing else for miles. "You are leaving me here?" he asked. The question was not an accusation, but a request for clarification. He needed to hear the words. He needed to understand the precise depth of the abyss that had opened between them. "We're not leaving you," Chloe said quickly, the lie catching in her throat. "We're just taking some space. You'll be fine. It's a rest stop. People come and go. We'll call a cab for you or something later, when we get to the city." The vagueness was the cruelest part. Later. Something. Leo started the car. The roar of the engine was a final, brutal verdict. "Get your bag, Dad," he said, his eyes fixed forward. Arthur slowly opened the door. He reached into the back, pulled out his simple duffel bag, and placed it on the dusty ground. He stood up, shut the door with a soft click, and looked at his son's reflection in the side mirror. For a fleeting second, he saw the face of the 10-year-old boy who had cried when he'd fallen off his bike, the boy whose scraped knee Arthur had carefully cleaned and bandaged. The memory was a sharp, physical pain. Then it was gone, replaced by the hard, unforgiving face of a stranger. The car pulled away, kicking up a cloud of dust that coated Arthur's shoes, his trousers, his soul. He stood perfectly still, watching it disappear down the long, straight ribbon of highway, until there was nothing left but the heat and the silence. The trial was over. The sentence had been carried out. And in that moment of absolute abandonment, Arthur felt not despair, but the cold, clean snap of a chain breaking. He stood there for a long time, not measuring the minutes, just feeling the sun move across the sky. The initial shock, the cold ember of betrayal, was slowly being banked and transformed into something else. It was not anger, not yet. It was a feeling of immense, desolate clarity. The world he had tried to inhabit, the role of the beloved, dependent father, was a fiction. The set had been struck, the actors had gone home, and he was left standing on the empty stage. He turned and surveyed his surroundings with an eye that had once assessed billion-dollar acquisitions and hostile takeovers. A dilapidated diner, a single payphone, 2 gas pumps, and a restroom. Limited assets, but enough. He walked with a steady, unhurried gait toward the diner, his duffel bag in one hand. The door chimed weakly as he entered. The air inside was thick with the smell of stale coffee and fried onions. A young woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Maria looked up from behind the counter where she was wiping down a sticky patch of ketchup. She was perhaps 19, a student at the local community college, he guessed, working a dead-end job to make ends meet. She saw an old man, looking lost and weary, and her expression softened with a natural, unforced kindness that felt like a glass of cool water in the desert. "Can I help you, sir?" she asked. "A bottle of water, please," Arthur said. His voice was raspy. He cleared his throat. "And change for the telephone." She nodded, sliding a cold bottle across the counter and counting out a handful of quarters. As she did, her eyes fell on the watch on his wrist. It was simple, unadorned, but the leather was of a quality she'd never seen, and there was a quiet elegance to the watch face that seemed out of place in this greasy spoon. It was just a flicker of curiosity, a momentary disconnect between the man's humble appearance and this one object of subtle refinement. "Everything all right?" she asked, her brow furrowed with genuine concern. "You look like you've had a long day." Arthur met her gaze and saw in it the simple, uncomplicated decency that his own family now lacked. "I have," he said, "but I believe it's about to get better." He gave her a small, sad smile, took the water and the coins, and walked to the payphone mounted on the wall near the restrooms. He picked up the heavy receiver, the plastic warm from the ambient heat. He paused, listening to the dial tone, a sound as archaic as his current situation. Then, with fingers that were as steady as a surgeon's, he dialed a number he had not called in 5 years, a number committed to memory, a direct line that bypassed secretaries and assistants. It rang once. A voice answered, crisp, powerful, and instantly recognizable. "Yes." There was no greeting, just a single, expectant word. "Marcus," Arthur said. "It's Arthur." There was a half-second of stunned silence on the other end of the line, the sound of a universe shifting on its axis. Then the voice, stripped of its boardroom brusqueness, was filled with a deep, palpable reverence. "Arthur. My God. Where are you? Are you all right?" "I'm fine, Marcus," Arthur said, his voice low and even. He looked out the diner's grimy window at the endless stretch of highway. "I've been retired. In more ways than one." He took a slow sip of water. "But I find myself in need of your services. It's time to liquidate." The silence on the other end was now one of profound comprehension. Marcus Thorne, the formidable CEO of Apex Dynamics, a man who commanded legions of employees and moved markets with a single utterance, understood everything in those 2 words. Liquidate. It wasn't just about stocks or assets. It was a scorched earth command. All of it? Marcus asked, his voice now a hushed whisper, a mixture of shock and unwavering loyalty. Everything, Arthur confirmed. The holding companies, the trusts, the portfolio, my controlling interest in Apex. Burn it to the ground. I want it all turned to cash. He could hear the faint sound of Marcus issuing quiet, urgent commands to someone in the background. The machine was starting to turn. Consider it done, Arthur, Marcus said, his voice firm again, all business. Where are you? I'll have a jet on the ground in an hour. Arthur looked around the humble diner. No jet, he said. I'm at a place called Coyote Pass. Send a car. Something quiet. And Marcus, he added, there is a young woman here named Maria. She was kind to me. Arrange something for her. A scholarship, a fund. Pay off her family's mortgage. Something significant. I'll handle it personally, Marcus promised. I need one more thing, Arthur said. I need you to arrange a meeting. With my son. And his wife. At your legal office. Tell them it's regarding my estate. A cold, hard edge entered his voice for the first time. They seem very concerned about my future. I feel it's time we discussed it. The moment Arthur hung up the phone, it was as if a switch had been flipped deep within the global financial system. In a glass-walled boardroom 47 floors above the bustling streets of New York City, Marcus Thorne stood up, his face a mask of grim determination. His executive team, deep in a discussion about quarterly earnings, fell silent, sensing the seismic shift in their leader's demeanor. The meeting is over, Marcus announced, his voice leaving no room for argument. He pointed to his chief legal counsel, a sharp, silver-haired woman named Evelyn Reed. Evelyn with me. Now. He walked to his private office, the city's glittering skyline sprawling beneath him like a map of his domain. But he knew, and had always known, that he was merely a steward. The true king had been in self-imposed exile. And now the king had spoken. Get me the Archangel Protocol team, he said to Evelyn as she entered, shutting the heavy oak door behind her. Full activation. Evelyn's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. The Archangel Protocol was a top-tier, deeply confidential contingency plan designed for one purpose only: to execute the personal, immediate, and absolute will of the company's founder, Arthur Vance. It hadn't been touched in a decade. It was a ghost file, a legend whispered about by the firm's oldest partners. Within minutes, a small, elite team of the company's most powerful lawyers, accountants, and strategic advisors were being pulled from meetings, from dinners, from golf courses around the world, their phones buzzing with a single, coded summons. The machinery of an empire was grinding into motion, all directed by a quiet command from a payphone in the middle of nowhere. While this silent, powerful army assembled, Leo and Chloe were 200 miles away, checking into a boutique hotel with ocean views. The relief in the car after they had left Arthur had been palpable. They had turned up the music, sung along badly, and talked excitedly about the fancy restaurant they would go to for dinner. The guilt was a small, easily manageable thing, buried under layers of self-justification. He'll be fine, Chloe said, scrolling through her phone. He's more resilient than we think. And honestly, we deserve this. We've earned a little time for ourselves. Leo, eager to agree, nodded. Exactly. It's for the best. A little shock to the system might even be good for him. Make him appreciate what he has. They were utterly oblivious, living in their small, self-centered world, while in another dimension of power and influence, that very world was being dismantled. In New York, the Archangel team was a whirlwind of focused activity. Massive data streams were being analyzed, portfolios worth billions were being flagged for immediate liquidation, and complex legal structures that had been dormant for years were being untangled. The order was simple and brutal: convert everything to liquid assets. Sell the stocks, the bonds, the real estate holdings in London and Tokyo. Dissolve the labyrinthine network of trusts and foundations that Arthur had built over a lifetime. It was a task that should have taken months, but with the full force of Apex dynamics behind it, driven by Marcus Thorne's unwavering loyalty, it was being accomplished in a matter of hours. The market would ripple from this, a mysterious, massive sell-off from an unknown entity. It would be the talk of Wall Street for weeks. They would never know it was the work of an old man in a worn jacket, sitting quietly in a desert diner, sipping a bottle of water. He had finished the water and was now just watching the heat shimmer off the asphalt outside. He felt a profound sense of calm. He was no longer Arthur Vance, the burdensome father. He was returning to himself, to the man who built things and, when necessary, tore them down. Maria, the cashier, occasionally glanced over at him. She saw a man transformed. The weariness was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, impenetrable stillness. He seemed larger, somehow, as if the small diner could no longer contain him. He was waiting, but it was the patient, powerful waiting of a predator, not the anxious waiting of the abandoned. An hour later, as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, painting the desert sky in hues of orange and purple, a car appeared. It was not a flashy limousine, but a sleek, black Audi A8, the kind of vehicle that speaks of quiet, serious money. It pulled up smoothly next to the diner, its tinted windows revealing nothing of the interior. The driver's door opened, and a man in a perfectly tailored dark suit stepped out. He was young, sharp, and moved with an air of discreet efficiency. He scanned the area once before entering the diner. His eyes immediately found Arthur. He walked directly to the counter. "I'm looking for a Mr. Vance," he said to Maria, his voice polite but firm. Arthur stood up. "I'm Arthur Vance." The man turned and gave a slight, respectful bow of his head. "Sir, I'm here on behalf of Mr. Thorne. I'm to escort you to your accommodations." He spoke with the deference a soldier would show a five-star general. Maria watched the exchange, her mouth slightly agape. This was not a cab. This was something else entirely. Arthur walked to the counter and placed a crisp $100 bill on it. "For the water and for your kindness," he said to Maria. "Thank you." Before Maria could protest, the man in the suit addressed her. "Ms. Garcia," he said, reading her name tag. "Mr. Thorne also sends his regards. You will be contacted tomorrow by a representative from the Thorne Philanthropic Foundation regarding the Desert Rose educational grant. It has been established in your name." Maria stared at him, dumbfounded, as Arthur and his escort walked out the door and got into the waiting sedan. The car pulled away as silently as it had arrived, leaving her standing in the doorway of the diner with a $100 bill in her hand and a future that had just been irrevocably changed. The drive was silent. Arthur watched the desert landscape slide by, the setting sun casting long shadows. He was being transported from one world to another, from a life of chosen obscurity back to the one he had left behind. They arrived not at a simple hotel, but at a sprawling, exclusive resort, a green oasis of golf courses and private villas nestled in the foothills. He was led to a private bungalow, exquisitely furnished and surrounded by a walled garden. Waiting inside was a young woman in a smart business suit. She had kind, intelligent eyes and an air of quiet competence. "Mr. Vance," she said, extending a hand. "My name is Sarah Jennings. I'm a paralegal with the firm. Mr. Thorne asked me to be here to assist you with anything you need." Sarah was the audience surrogate, the observer. She had been briefed by the legendary Evelyn Reed herself. She knew who this man was, or rather, she knew the legend of Mr. A, the mythical founder. But meeting him in person was disorienting. He was just a quiet, grandfatherly man in a simple jacket. Yet, the entire weight of a multi-billion-dollar corporation was currently revolving around his comfort. She watched him as he surveyed the luxurious suite. He showed no sign of being impressed. He simply walked to the window and looked out at the garden. "Thank you, Sarah," he said. "A glass of water would be nice." She hurried to get it for him, feeling an overwhelming sense of awe. The quiet power he radiated was more intimidating than any shouting CEO she had ever encountered. It was the absolute confidence of a man who had nothing to prove. Later that evening, Sarah brought him a stack of documents that had been securely couriered from New York. They were the preliminary papers for the great liquidation. He sat at a large mahogany desk and reviewed them, his eyes sharp and focused. He made a few notes in the margins with a simple pen. It was in this moment that Sarah understood. He was not a relic. He was a king, surveying his kingdom one last time before ordering its dissolution. The plan for the climax was now in place. An email, drafted by Evelyn Reed herself and sent from the firm's official server, had been dispatched to Leo and Chloe. It was formal, cold, and official. "You are hereby summoned to a meeting at the offices of Thorne, Reed, and Associates to discuss an urgent matter pertaining to the estate and future welfare of your father, Arthur Vance." Leo and Chloe received it on Chloe's laptop in their hotel room. They had just returned from their expensive dinner, flushed with wine and self-satisfaction. They read the email, and their mood instantly soured. But not with worry for Arthur's well-being. Their minds leaped immediately to the most selfish conclusions. "His estate," Chloe said, her eyes wide. "What happened? Did he fall? Is he in the hospital?" Leo paced the room. "This is just great. He's probably gotten himself into some kind of legal trouble." Now we have to go and clean up his mess. Future welfare. That means he needs money. I knew this would happen. They saw it not as a family crisis, but as a logistical and financial nightmare. The trap, baited with their own greed and lack of empathy, had been set. And they were walking right into it. The offices of Thorne, Reed, and Associates occupied the top 3 floors of a downtown skyscraper, a bastion of old-world power and new-world money. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and polished brass, where silence was the prevailing currency. Leo and Chloe arrived precisely at the appointed time, their faces a mixture of annoyance and nervous anticipation. They were dressed in what they considered to be their most impressive serious attire, an unconscious effort to project an authority they did not possess. They were met by a receptionist who spoke in hushed tones and led them down a long, silent hallway lined with imposing oil portraits of the firm's founding partners. The air itself felt heavy with the weight of consequence. They were shown into Conference Room A, a magnificent chamber with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. A single massive table of dark, polished oak, large enough to seat 30, dominated the room. And at the far end, sitting alone, was Arthur. He was wearing the same simple clothes he'd had on at the rest stop, a clean shirt, comfortable trousers, his worn jacket. He looked small and out of place against the backdrop of immense corporate power. Seeing him sitting there, seemingly unharmed, ignited a fresh wave of irritation in his son. "Dad!" Leo exclaimed, his voice too loud for the room. "What is all this? We got a terrifying email. We drove all the way back here. Are you okay? What did you do?" Chloe rushed to his side, her voice a cascade of saccharine concern. "Arthur, we were so worried. Are you in some kind of trouble? You can tell us. We're here to help." The condescension was automatic, a deeply ingrained habit. They saw the scene and interpreted it through the only lens they had. Their father was a doddering old man who had stumbled into a situation far beyond his comprehension, and they, the responsible adults, had been called in to fix it. Arthur looked at them, his expression unreadable. He didn't answer immediately. He let their words hang in the air, let their assumptions fill the grand, silent room. He watched them, not as a father looks at his children, but as a biologist might observe a specimen under a microscope. He was studying a phenomenon he no longer understood, the complete and utter corrosion of their character. "I didn't do anything," he said finally, his voice quiet but carrying a strange weight. "I just made a phone call." Before Leo could respond with another impatient question, the conference room doors opened with a soft, authoritative swoosh. Marcus Thorne entered the room. He was not alone. He was flanked by Evelyn Reed and 2 other stern-faced individuals who radiated an aura of unflappable competence. Marcus was tall, impeccably dressed in a bespoke suit, and his presence immediately sucked all the oxygen out of the room. He moved with the predatory grace of a man who owned every room he entered. Leo and Chloe stared at him, momentarily silenced by this sudden intrusion of raw power. They didn't know who he was, but they knew instinctively that he was important. They assumed he was the high-powered lawyer assigned to their father's case. "Mr. and Mrs. Vance," Marcus said, his voice a low, resonant baritone that commanded attention. He did not offer to shake their hands. He walked to the head of the table and stood beside Arthur. He placed a hand gently on Arthur's shoulder, a gesture of profound, almost reverent respect. "Thank you for coming. I am Marcus Thorne." Leo, attempting to regain his footing, puffed out his chest slightly. "Right. Well, Mr. Thorne, I'm Leo Vance. This is my wife, Chloe. Look, we're not sure what this is all about, but if my father has incurred some kind of legal fee." Marcus cut him off, not with a word, but with a look. It was a look of such cold, dismissive power that Leo's sentence simply withered and died in his throat. Marcus then turned his attention to them fully. "I am the Chief Executive Officer of Apex Dynamics," he stated, as if announcing a law of physics. The name hung in the air. Apex Dynamics. Even Leo and Chloe, in their bubble of self-interest, knew the name. It was a global behemoth, a titan of technology and innovation. Their smart home system was made by Apex. The software on their phones ran on an Apex operating system. Chloe's company was a major client of an Apex subsidiary. A flicker of confusion crossed their faces. What did the CEO of one of the world's largest corporations have to do with their simple, retired father? The power dynamic in the room had not just shifted, it had been completely inverted. They were no longer the saviors. They were suddenly, terrifyingly, out of their depth. The silence that followed Marcus Thorne's introduction was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Leo and Chloe stood frozen, their minds struggling to bridge the impossible chasm between the quiet, unassuming man they called Dad and the CEO of a global megacorporation who was now standing beside him like a loyal sentinel. Marcus let the silence stretch, allowing the full weight of their cognitive dissonance to settle upon them. Then he began to speak. His voice was not loud, but it filled the cavernous room, each word carefully chosen and delivered with the gravitas of a eulogy and the force of a final judgment. "You look at this man," he began, his gaze sweeping over Leo and Chloe with undisguised contempt, "and you see an old man, a burden, a problem to be managed. You see a life that is over. Your ignorance is not just an insult. It is a tragedy." He paused, letting the indictment land. "You live in a world this man built, and you don't even know his name. You use technology he invented, you benefit from an economy he helped shape, and you have the audacity to treat him with pity." Marcus took a slow walk along the side of the long table, his eyes never leaving them. "Let me tell you who you are looking at. 35 years ago, this man, Arthur Vance, was not your father. He was a phantom known in the highest circles of finance and technology only as Mr. A. He started with nothing. Not a loan, not a family fortune. He started in a rented garage with a soldering iron, a brilliant mind, and a will of unbreakable iron. He slept on the floor of that garage for 2 years. His first patent, for a microprocessing innovation, he drafted by hand on the back of a napkin. That single idea is now the foundation of the entire global wireless communication network. It is, quite literally, in the pocket of almost every person on this planet. On a large screen behind Marcus, which had been dark until now, an image appeared, a black and white photo of a much younger Arthur, sleeves rolled up, standing proudly in a cluttered garage. Text began to appear beside the image, simple, stark, and devastating. Patent US 4.815.162, Asynchronous Data Transfer Protocol. Chloe let out a small, involuntary gasp. Leo's face had gone pale, a sickly, clammy white. "For 10 years, Marcus continued, his voice resonating with a deep, reverent passion, he worked in obscurity building. He founded a small company called Apex. Maybe you've heard of it. He didn't seek fame. He sought perfection. He didn't seek accolades. He sought to build things that would last. When his competitors were chasing quarterly profits, he was investing in 100-year ideas. When they were buying yachts, he was funding university research departments anonymously. He mentored a generation of engineers and entrepreneurs, many of whom are now titans in their own right. They all call him, to this day, the architect." The screen changed, now showing a dizzying montage of newspaper headlines, magazine covers from Forbes and Wired with a silhouetted figure, and complex corporate family trees, all originating from a single box labeled Apex. "He took Apex public 15 years ago," Marcus said, his voice dropping slightly. "It was the largest tech IPO in history. He became, overnight, one of the wealthiest men in the world. But you wouldn't know that, because the day after the IPO, he put every single one of his shares into a blind trust and removed his own name from the board of directors, installing me as his successor. He walked away from it all. Why? He told me why. He said he had built an empire, but he had missed watching his son grow up. He said the only thing he wanted to build next was a family. He chose you." Marcus stopped directly in front of them now, his proximity an overwhelming force. "He chose to be Dad. He put on the costume of a simple, retired man, so that you would see him, not his money. He gave you a life of privilege you never earned, funded by a fortune you never knew existed. And in return, you treated him like garbage. You sighed when he asked for a glass of water. You rolled your eyes at his stories. And then, you left him. You abandoned him on the side of a highway like a piece of trash." He pointed a finger, not at them, but back at Arthur, who was still sitting silently at the head of the table, his face a calm, stoic mask. "That man, the man you left in the desert, is Arthur Vance, founder and chairman emeritus of Apex Dynamics, holder of 17 key patents in microtechnology, chief benefactor of the Vance Foundation for Education and Science, the quiet architect of the modern world. And you are his greatest failure." The finality of Marcus's words hung in the air like the tolling of a great iron bell. The silence that descended was absolute, a vacuum where sound, thought, and breath ceased to exist. Leo and Chloe stood as if turned to stone, their faces a grotesque tableau of shock, disbelief, and a dawning, soul-crushing horror. The intricate, self-serving reality they had constructed for themselves had not just been cracked, it had been atomized, obliterated by a truth so vast and incomprehensible it defied belief. Leo's mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish gasping for air. The smug impatience, the ingrained condescension, had been sandblasted away, leaving behind the raw, terrified face of a boy who had just realized he had committed an unforgivable sin. Chloe's hands were trembling. Her eyes, wide and unfocused, darted from Marcus's unyielding face to the silent, still figure of Arthur at the end of the table. She was seeing him for the first time, not as her bumbling, out-of-touch father-in-law, but as a colossus, a king whose vast, invisible empire had protected and nurtured them their entire lives, an empire they had just gleefully desecrated. The screen behind Marcus now displayed a single, simple document, a letterhead from the firm. Marcus walked back to the head of the table and stood beside Arthur. He placed a folder in front of him. "The liquidation is complete," Marcus said, his voice now calm and businesslike, a surgeon reporting the results of a successful, radical amputation. "All assets, shares, and holdings have been converted. The family trusts have been dissolved." He slid a single piece of paper from the folder and placed it in the center of the vast oak table, pushing it towards the empty space between Leo and Chloe. It was a cashier's check, but the number written on it was beyond their comprehension. It was a string of zeros that seemed to stretch into infinity. "This is the final tally," Marcus explained. "The sum total of the Vance estate." He then placed a second set of documents next to the check. "And this is the charter for a new entity. The Maria Garcia Foundation for Second Chances, endowed with the full amount. Its mission will be to provide educational and entrepreneurial grants to individuals who have shown kindness and decency in the face of adversity." The name Maria Garcia meant nothing to them, but the implication was as clear as a blade. Their inheritance, a fortune they never even knew they had, a sum that could have funded their wildest dreams for 1,000 lifetimes, had just been given away, named for a stranger. It was the ultimate, most devastatingly elegant rebuke. Arthur had not shouted, had not argued. He had simply rewritten the world. Finally, Arthur moved. He picked up a heavy, expensive-looking fountain pen that Sarah had placed discreetly by his hand. He uncapped it with a soft click. He looked down at the final page of the foundation charter, the signature line waiting for him. He did not look at his son. He did not look at his daughter-in-law. It was as if they had already ceased to exist, faded into the background like the expensive furniture. With a hand that was perfectly steady, a hand that had once signed deals that shifted the course of industries, he signed his name, Arthur Vance. The signature was firm, clear, and final. It was the last official act of Mr. A, the architect. He was now just Arthur, a man with a clean slate, a man who had sold his past to buy back his soul. He had fulfilled the promise of the video's title, a promise made in the dust and heat of a lonely rest stop. He had sold everything, and in doing so he had reclaimed it all. Arthur placed the pen down softly on the table. The quiet click echoed in the tomb-like silence of the room. He had not said a single word throughout the entire revelation. His silence was more profound, more damning, than any speech could ever have been. It was the silence of a closed door, a locked gate, a chapter finished and the book put away forever. He slowly pushed his chair back. The sound of its legs scraping against the polished floor was unnaturally loud. He stood up, his posture straight, the perceived frailty of the last decade completely gone. He was no longer playing a role. He was simply himself, a man at peace with a terrible decision. Leo finally found his voice, but it was a pathetic, strangled whisper. "Dad." The word was a plea, a desperate, last-second attempt to rewind time, to undo the cataclysm. It was the cry of a man realizing he has just thrown away the sun, the moon, and all the stars. Arthur turned his head slightly, not enough to meet his son's eyes, but enough to acknowledge the sound. He paused for a single, eternal second. In that moment, a universe of potential forgiveness and reconciliation hung in the balance. But the abyss was too wide. The betrayal had been too absolute. He turned his head forward again, and the moment passed. The universe collapsed back into its new, harsh reality. He began to walk towards the door, his steps steady and unhurried. He walked past his son and daughter-in-law as if they were ghosts, transparent and insubstantial. He did not offer a look of anger, or pity, or even sadness. He offered them nothing. The most complete and devastating punishment of all, a void. He had excised them from his life as cleanly as a surgeon removes a cancer. The young paralegal, Sarah, who had been standing discreetly by the door the entire time, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and profound sympathy, reached out and pulled the heavy door open for him. As he passed, he paused and looked at her, truly looked at her. He gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod of thanks. It was a simple gesture, but it was filled with the humanity and grace he had once tried to give his own family. It was a connection, a moment of shared decency, and in the context of the ruin he was leaving behind him, it was everything. He stepped out into the hallway. Sarah gently closed the door behind him, the soft click sealing Leo and Chloe inside their new reality, a world of their own making, a world without him. The final shot from inside the room was of them. Leo had sunk into a chair, his head in his hands, making a low, wounded sound. Chloe stood, her arms wrapped around herself, tears streaming down her face as she stared at the check on the table, a monument to the life they had just lost. The narrator's voice, now calm and reflective, began. Honor is not a title. Wealth is not a number in a bank account. Strength is not measured in the noise you make, but in the quiet dignity with which you endure. Arthur Vance had spent a lifetime building an empire of things, but he had lost himself in the process. It took the ultimate betrayal to show him the way back, not to his fortune, but to his own soul. The camera followed Arthur as he walked down the long, silent corridor, away from the conference room, away from his past. He was not walking towards another empire, another fortune. He was just walking, a free man. He was not the broken old man abandoned at a rest stop. He was not the powerful titan who had just dismantled a dynasty. He was simply Arthur, walking towards a quiet, unknown future, his honor restored, his spirit, at long last, at peace. What is the true measure of a person's worth? Is it what they accumulate, or what they are willing to give away? We all face moments that test our character, moments where we choose between bitterness and grace. What would you have done in Arthur's position? Share your thoughts with us in the comments below. Your stories and perspectives are what make this community strong. And for more stories that explore the incredible resilience of the human spirit, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel. Because sometimes the greatest act of building begins with the courage to tear everything down.